I just finished my 4 p.m. to midnight tour and I was driving home. Like I did almost every Saturday night, I stopped on East 88th Street, right off the Grand Concourse, to buy the Sunday Daily News. I can still see it as if it happened yesterday. I had the newspaper in my hand, then boom, one gunshot. One gunshot. Not a barrage, one shot. The kind of shot every cop recognizes instantly. I turned. A man collapsed beside a payphone. Execution. 1 round to the head. And I saw him. A man dressed in black with a hood pulled up over his head, was sprinting away. I didn't recognize his face. I recognized the way he moved.
The Voice of Gotham with Pat Brosnan.
South Bronx, December 1987. The crack epidemic was eating the borough alive. Every day, another bodega got hit. Store owners lived behind bulletproof glass and wondered if today would be the day that somebody came flying through the door and put a gun to their head. Fear had become part of doing business, and one crew wasn't just robbing stores, they were terrorizing an entire neighborhood. They called themselves the Park Ave Posse, a pack of young, heavily armed street predators with the same tight Caesar haircuts. They all had them. They moved fast, they struck without hesitation, and specialized in robbing bodegas. But robbery was not enough. They shot people. They beat people. They came back to the same stores over and over again until the owners felt completely helpless. By then, I had only been in the 46th Precinct robbery squad a few months. I was the rookie. That meant when everybody else went to the squad Christmas party, the rookie stayed behind, answered the phones, and caught whatever cases came through the door. Sometimes that's exactly how your life changes. That night, an elderly bodega owner named Onesimo Sanchez walked into the squad with members of his family. They weren't angry, they were terrified. The fear in their faces told the story before they even opened their mouths. Mr. Sanchez explained that the same gang had robbed his store over and over again. 3 robberies in the last month, 2 in the same week. During one of those robberies, they shot one of his workers in the leg. Onesimo looked exhausted, like a man who had simply run out of places to turn. I looked him in the eye, listened to every word, and I made him a promise. We were going to stop these animals. From that moment on, I was on this case with my partners like a mountain lion. My partners, Detective John Fleming and Detective Eddie Murphy and Detective Kevin Tracy, and I convinced Mr. Sanchez and the shot employee, who was limping pretty bad, to work with us. So we started hunting. Night after night, we sat in my van, a dirty old van that blended in perfectly, and we did surveillance outside the bodega and also patrolled the area, hunting, looking for a chance opportunity that either Mr. Sanchez or the shot employee would identify any of these Caesar haircut-wearing gang members. Just a few detectives with 2 witnesses in an old van, drinking bad coffee, freezing through long Bronx nights. We didn't have any heat in the car, in the van, waiting for one mistake from the Park Ave Posse. The breakthrough didn't come from luck. It came from the street. One of our confidential informants, someone that we paid out of our own pocket, gave us our first solid lead. Angel Diaz, 181st Street and Park Avenue. Myself, John Fleming, and Detective Kevin Tracy rolled over there immediately. Now, normally, we'd hit a door like a battering ram. That was just our style in the 80s. Just kick it right off the hinges. We felt that warrants were for sissies. But not this time. We believed there were close to 8 members of the posse still on the street. And if we blasted through that apartment door, every other member would disappear before sunrise. So I tried something different, something novel. I knocked. And when Angel asked who was there, I told him I needed to speak to him about some personal problem involving a girl, some kind of drama, not police business, just some silly stuff. So it worked. He took the bait. His guard came down and he opened the door, and he stepped into the hallway. The second he crossed that threshold, the game changed. We grabbed him super clean. It was a textbook apprehension. Unfortunately, Angel Diaz wasn't interested in helping anybody, particularly us. We worked him, we pressed him, we grilled him relentlessly. Nothing. Zero. He clammed up completely. He was a tough piece of work. But the streets have a funny way of talking, even when suspects don't. Everywhere we turned, we kept hearing the same name, Joey Aponte. The brains, the leader, the one calling the shots. If we wanted to crush the Park Avenue Posse, and we did, we weren't looking for another foot soldier anymore. We were hunting the alpha wolf. And the break came quicker than we expected. I spotted another posse member, Jesus Mendez, walking the streets on the Grand Concourse, grabbed him and tossed him, and he was carrying a loaded 9mm pistol. So we took him down without incident, threw him into Rikers.
By the time detectives caged one member of the Park Avenue Posse, 3 more filled his spot. But every arrest was a thread, and thread by thread, the case kept pulling toward the same name, Joey Aponte. No one knew it yet, but this was about to become one of the wildest manhunts in the history of the 4-6.
But unlike Angel Diaz, Jesus decided to cooperate. Piece by piece, the puzzle started coming together. Jesus identified for us 2 more members of the crew, Richard Laureano and Julio Mendez. The noose was tightening. Every arrest gave us another piece of the gang. Every interview told us a little bit more about how they operated. And every night, the pressure increased. The Park Avenue Posse could feel us closing in, and at the center of it all, one name kept coming back, Joey Aponte. He was still out there, and before long, our hunt for him would turn into one of the wildest manhunts of my entire police career. By now, the investigation had taken on a life of its own. Every arrest brought another name. Every confidential informant pointed us in a different direction. Every detective in the squad knew who we were after, Joey. He wasn't just another member. He was the quarterback, the boss. He was giving the orders. So we developed information that Joey occasionally stayed with his half-sister on Belmont Avenue in the 48th precinct. Then Mother Nature gave us a break. A heavy snowstorm blanketed the Bronx. 2 feet of snow. I figured nobody in their right mind was going anywhere in that weather. And if Joey was staying with his sister, his half-sister, chances were he'd still be inside. Detective Kevin Tracy and I shot over there. We decided to hit the apartment from both ends. Kevin would make the entry through the front by kicking the door down, and I'd cover the rear, being on the fire escape. Simple, or so we thought. Kevin hit the front door. The second it came crashing down, Joey did exactly what we expected. He ran, but not toward the hallway, straight for the back window. 1 second I was standing alone on that icy fire escape in the middle of a blizzard. The next second, Joey Aponte came exploding through the window, wearing nothing but his underwear and a t-shirt. He wasn't expecting to find me waiting for him, and the fire escape was coated with ice. The 2 of us collided like 2 freight trains. There was no room to maneuver. Just the 2 of us fighting, trying to control one another. He was trying to escape, and I was trying to make the arrest. And we slipped, and both of us went over the edge. We crashed into the snow below, which was probably 2 feet high, maybe a little higher, and I believe that drift probably saved both of our lives. It was a 2-story fall. If that ground had been frozen solid, it would have been a completely different story. Instead, I busted up my shoulder pretty bad, and Joey fought like a tiger. We rolled around the snow, throwing punches, until I finally got control of him and snapped the cuffs on. Fight over. Joey Aponte was finally captured. By then, I had spent weeks chasing him through the Bronx. I'd watched what his gang had done to innocent store owners. I'd seen the fear that they left behind. Now it was his turn to be uncomfortable. So I marched him through the entire system exactly the way I caught him. Both at the booking cell at the 4-6, central booking on 161st, and pre-arraignment in court. He was wearing the whole time exactly what he was wearing when he burst out onto the fire escape: a t-shirt and his underwear, no coat, and blizzard conditions. So it was quite the sight in central booking, and that's just the way it was in the Bronx, you know? You want to dance, you got to pay the band. So we charged him with armed robbery, a serious violent felony. I thought he'd stay exactly where he belonged in Rikers, but instead a catch and release judge, just like we see so much today, let him walk. And Joey Aponte was back on the streets. Now, he believes some people in the neighborhood snitched on him, and he went on a rampage. He started settling scores. Anybody he believed had snitched or had crossed him in any way, anybody who knew too much, or as it turned out, anybody unfortunate enough to even bump into him, was killed. He became a killing machine. Joey murdered 6 people in 2 weeks, including a grocery store owner on Castle Hill Avenue, who he shot 3 times in the chest. The very next day, he killed a guy in broad daylight outside the Loewy's Paradise on the Grand Concourse. Why? The guy had bumped into him. He was a mad dog killer, and the body count kept climbing. The Bronx detectives had a homicidal maniac on the loose. So the Bronx Homicide Task Force apprehension team was quickly assembled. Legendary detectives like John Tierney and Jimmy Finnegan took to the lead. They were bloodhounds, the kind of detectives who could smell a fugitive. Together, with my team in the 4-6 robbery squad, we worked around the clock, days, nights, weekends, holidays, kicking down doors, interviewing anyone, interviewing everyone who might know something, paying confidential informants out of our own pockets, because that's how detectives worked cases back then. Nobody cared whose case it was. We all wanted the same thing: find Joey Aponte before he killed again. But Joey vanished like smoke. For nearly 2 weeks, nothing. Then one Saturday night, pure chance placed me 30 feet behind one of the most dangerous killers in New York City, just seconds after he had executed another man. And that moment is something I'll remember for the rest of my life. I just finished my 4 p.m. to midnight tour, and I was driving home. Like I did almost every Saturday night, I stopped on East 88th Street, right off the Grand Concourse, to buy the Sunday Daily News. I can still see it as if it happened yesterday. I had the newspaper in my hand, then boom, one gunshot. One gunshot. Not a barrage, one shot. The kind of shot every cop recognizes instantly. I turned. A man collapsed beside a payphone. Execution. 1 round to the head. And I saw him. A man dressed in black with a hood pulled up over his head, was sprinting away. I didn't recognize his face. I recognized the way he moved. It was Joey. I was about 30 feet behind him. I drew my off-duty .38 Detective Special and took off running as fast as I could. Joey already had his escape planned. About 100 yards away, parked on the east side of the Grand Concourse, was a blue AMC Gremlin. I recognized it immediately, not because I was a car expert, but because my brother owned a Gremlin, and there weren't that many of them around. And that car burned itself into my memory the instant I saw it. Joey jumped inside, the driver hit the gas, and they were gone. I've replayed that night in my mind for almost 40 years. 2 things have always bothered me. The first is tactical. Why wasn't the getaway car parked right next to the payphone? Why leave it 100 yards away? And the more I thought about it, the more I became convinced Joey hadn't simply waited at that payphone. He'd been stalking his victim. Back then, payphones were constantly broken in the Bronx. None of them worked. I believe the victim first tried using the phone on the east side of the Grand Concourse, and it didn't work. So he walked into the subway at 188th Street, crossed underneath the Grand Concourse, and came up on the west side and used the payphone outside the very store where I was buying the Sunday Daily News. And Joey shadowed him the entire time, like an assassin, waiting for exactly the right moment. Now, the second thing has bothered me even more. Why didn't Joey shoot me? By then, Joey had already murdered at least 6 people in 2 weeks, and he wasn't leaving witnesses. And now I was a living witness. So I was screaming after him, running full speed, revolver in my hand. If anybody had a reason to turn around and fire, it was Joey Aponte. But he never did. To this day, I don't know why. Maybe he thought he could outrun me. Maybe he didn't realize how close I was. And maybe he simply refused to get into a gunfight with a detective in the middle of the Grand Concourse. I'll never know. What I do know is this: I never had a clean shot. Traffic was flying up and down the Grand Concourse like cannonballs, and he was fast as hell. And cars were constantly crossing between us. Every time I started to line them up for a shot, another vehicle flashed through my sight picture. Joey got lucky. He escaped that night. But something had changed. He knew we were getting closer, and his family knew it too. We grilled them repeatedly and made it crystal clear that it was extremely likely he would be killed by the police in a gunfight. Eventually, the pressure became too much. Someone in the family picked up the phone. The tip was simple. Joey Aponte was inside the Loewy's Paradise Theater on the Grand Concourse for the afternoon matinee. The movie could not have been more fitting. A Nightmare on Elm Street, Part 4. Sometimes real life writes better scripts than Hollywood. We moved immediately. There wasn't going to be a second chance. The plan was brilliant in its simplicity. My partners, Detectives John Fleming and Kevin Tracy, went inside dressed as theater ushers. Just 2 more employees walking through the theater. Joey and his crew were sitting all the way in the back row, all the way up high, exactly where fugitives like to sit. From there, they could watch everyone coming through the doors while keeping an escape route behind them. By this point, we had already arrested 7 members of the original Park Avenue Posse. Joey had simply rebuilt the organization. He'd recruited 6 new members, different faces, same gang, same violence. As Fleming and Tracy worked their way up the aisle, Joey looked down. Something caught his eye, and then he froze. He recognized Kevin Tracy immediately. How could he forget? Kevin was the detective who had kicked in his half-sister's front door the day we fought on the icy fire escape. In an instant, Joey knew exactly what was happening. He exploded out of his seat, and the theater erupted into chaos. People started screaming, some hit the floor, others ran for the exits. Joey reached into his waistband, pulled out a handgun, and tossed it to one of the new posse members. The kid looked at it for about a half a second, and he slapped it right onto the floor. He wanted no part of a gunfight with the detectives. But Joey was not finished. He reached for another weapon in his waistband. Around the Bronx, we had a name for that: the Bronx Reload. Now, I carry 3 guns, so I guess that makes me 2 Bronx Reloads. Before Joey could bring that second gun into the fight, John Fleming fired. Joey Aponte went down. The entire confrontation lasted only seconds. When it was over, everyone believed the same thing. John had made an incredible shot. It appeared that Joey had been struck squarely in the forehead. Case closed, or so we thought. The next day, the medical examiner told a different story. The fatal wound wasn't from John's bullet. It was self-inflicted. At virtually the exact instant that John Fleming fired, Joey had turned the gun on himself and pulled the trigger. I wasn't surprised, not really. Joey had told me something several times weeks earlier that I'll never forget when I was taking him through court. "I'll never let you take me back to jail alive, Brosnan." That was a quote. And he kept his word, even in death.
He left behind a fiancée, Michelle Rosa, and a 1-month-old son he'd never really know. The day he died, witnesses say Joey played with the baby, kissed Michelle goodbye, and walked out the door for the last time.
One comment afterward has stayed with me all these years. Joey's own mother spoke to a Daily News reporter after the shooting. She knew exactly what kind of life her son had chosen. She wasn't pretending he was some misunderstood kid. But in her grief, she asked a question only a mother could ask. Couldn't they have just shot him in the leg? The next day's headline captured the moment perfectly. Nightmare at the Loewy's Paradise. With Joey dead, the Park Avenue Posse had lost its leader. But our work was not finished, not even close. Now came the hard part, turning months of detective work into convictions. We still had to put the rest of these violent animals into prison. And if we had anything to say about it, they were going to disappear behind the walls of Attica for a very, very long time.
Joey Aponte was dead, and for 1 week in the 4-6, it felt like justice. But putting a bullet in a killer and putting his crew away for good were two very different fights. The second one was just getting started.
Now, people think the danger, it ends when the handcuffs go on. But the Park Avenue Posse was not finished intimidating people just because they were locked up. Not even close. One day I was testifying in court during one of the early proceedings when Angel Diaz was being moved through the courthouse. Our key civilian witness, Onesimo Sanchez, was there. The same quiet bodega owner who had finally found the courage to stand up to these savages after they had robbed him again and again and again, shot one of his employees, and terrorized his family. As Angel Diaz walked past Onesimo, he slowly lifted his cuffed hands and drew them across his throat, a throat-slashing gesture. His message couldn't have been any clearer. You're next. He wasn't threatening me. He was threatening Mr. Sanchez, right there, inside a courtroom, in front of a judge. I was furious. I turned immediately toward the bench and said, "Did you see that, Your Honor?" Fortunately, the judge was a former New York City court officer. He understood exactly what had just happened. He didn't tolerate intimidation. He stopped the proceeding on the spot. I filed new charges immediately for witness intimidation, and Angel Diaz was dragged from the courtroom screaming and thrown back into a holding cell. Within an hour, he stabbed his cellmate. As the case moved into Bronx Supreme Court, we finally caught a tremendous break. The case was assigned to Assistant District Attorney Stephen Cherry. Detective Fleming, Kevin Tracy, Sergeant Ed Murphy, and I couldn't have asked for a better prosecutor. Steve was relentless. He wasn't interested in making headlines. He wasn't interested in politics. He wanted convictions, just like we did. So over the next several months, we became a team. The detectives hunted the evidence. Steve built the case. Every interview, every lineup, every surveillance report, every ballistics report, every witness statement. Every single piece of evidence had to fit together perfectly. That's what juries never see. A trial isn't won during closing arguments. It's won months beforehand by detectives and prosecutors grinding through thousands of details until every loose end disappears. During that time, Steve shared something with us that I'll never forget. Years earlier, he had prosecuted another violent criminal and sent him to Attica. While that inmate was in prison, Steve began receiving photographs in the mail. He showed them to us. They were in his office. The pictures showed a man, a monster, lifting weights, jogging, working out, and written on the back of the pictures were messages promising Steve that when he got out, he was coming for him. Steve did not take those threats lightly. Neither did we. He lived with his father over in Pelham Parkway, and like many prosecutors in those days, handling violent gang cases, he carried a handgun, a revolver. Word eventually reached us that the inmate had been released while we were still prepping with Steve on the case, and I remember us jumping into our cars and racing over to check on his dad. That's the relationship detectives had with prosecutors back then. If someone threatened one of us, they threatened all of us. Steve also had 2 enormous Doberman Pinschers in his apartment. I always figured anyone who got past those dogs had already made one terrible decision. Around that same period, another disturbing incident occurred. Multiple rounds were fired into the west side of the Bronx courthouse building. To this day, I can't say those shots were connected to the threats against Steve. No one ever proved that. But plenty of people working that case believed there was a connection. Whether there was or wasn't, it tells you the atmosphere we were working in. These were not ordinary defendants. These were violent career criminals who believed witnesses, detectives, and prosecutors were simply obstacles to be eliminated. After months of testimony, countless hours in court, and an enormous amount of work by everyone involved, the jury came back with exactly the verdict we believe justice demanded. Convictions across the board.
The convictions came, every one of them. For a moment, it felt like the South Bronx could breathe. But some cases don't end when the jury comes back. Some cases follow you home.
The defendants who chose to go to trial received heavy state prison sentences ranging from 19 and a half years to 33 years. We believed we had finally done it. The Park Avenue Posse had terrorized the South Bronx. Now they were all headed to Attica. Justice had won, or so we thought. Because what happened next would become one of the most heartbreaking lessons of my entire career. Sometimes catching the bad guy is only half the battle. After the convictions, we finally exhaled. The posse was gone. The South Bronx could finally breathe again in the 46th precinct. At least that's what we thought. The television show Top Cops thought the story was so extraordinary that they flew Detective Fleming and myself to Canada, where we spent 2 weeks filming a 2-hour television special about the investigation. We looked back on the case with a sense of accomplishment. A dangerous robbery crew had been dismantled. A homicidal gang leader was dead. The remaining members were serving lengthy prison sentences. Case closed. Except it wasn't. Then came the phone call that every detective hates. The convictions had been overturned for several of the defendants. Not because they were innocent, not because the witnesses lied, not because we arrested the wrong people. It was a technical legal issue involving the firearm used in the shooting inside Onesimo Sanchez's bodega. That simple technicality resulted in Angel Diaz, Jesus Mendez, and Ricardo Morales being released. A Bronx jury had convicted them on August 15, 1990, but on May 1st, 1995, they walked out of prison. Do the math. About 4 years and 8 months behind bars. 1,720 days. That was all the time that they served before being released back to the streets of the Bronx. People sometimes ask me whether prison rehabilitates violent predators. My answer has always been no. 318 days after their release, March 14, 1996, Angel Diaz, Jesus Mendez, and Ricardo Morales murdered a New York City police officer, Kevin Gillespie.
6 months after he killed Officer Kevin Gillespie, Angel Diaz was sitting in a maximum security cell at Rikers Island, waiting to become one of the first men in New York facing a death penalty case in decades. He never got there. In September of 1996, Diaz wrapped a belt around his neck and hanged himself from the bars of his own cell.
318 days later, a New York City police officer is dead. Those are facts. They're difficult facts, but they're facts. When people talk about the consequences of criminal justice decisions and catch and release judges, this is what they're talking about. When I think back on the Park Avenue Posse, I don't remember the long hours in surveillance. I don't remember the snowstorm. I don't remember the fight on the fire escape. I don't even remember chasing Joey Aponte across the Grand Concourse as vividly as I remember what happened after those convictions were undone. That's the part that has stayed with me. The ripple effect, the cost, the lesson. This was the South Bronx in the late 1980s. Real monsters, real victims, real detectives like John Fleming, Eddie Murphy, Kevin Tracy, John Tierney, Jimmy Finnegan, and Sergeant Ed Murphy. All of us worked shoulder to shoulder until the job was done. We had a relentless prosecutor in Steve Cherry, who never stopped fighting for justice, and we had one quiet bodega owner named Onesimo Sanchez, whose courage to stand up against violent criminals helped bring down an entire robbery crew. People say the hunt ended when Joey Aponte died inside of Loewy's Paradise. They're wrong. The hunt never really ended because the consequences of that case echoed for years afterwards. From the streets that raised me, that's how it happened. Until next time, stay safe, watch each other's backs, and never stop fighting for what's right.